Many Chinese gangs and organized crime groups originated in San Francisco's Chinatown. The most famous of these were Ching and Joe Boys. However, there's another criminal group that hasn't been talked about as much, the Hop Sing Tong and its youth cell, the Hop Sing Boys Gang. Unlike other criminal groups, Hop Sing's influence extended far beyond the streets of Chinatown, forming a global criminal network with interactions with foreign triads. Hop Sing became famous not only in San Francisco, but nationwide due to incidents involving their infamous leader, Raymond "Shrimp Boy" Chow, who can be considered one of the top Chinese gangsters in the United States. In this video, we will tell the whole story of Raymond Chow, from his climb up the criminal career ladder to his fall, imprisonment, and redemption. So meet Raymond "Shrimp Boy" Chow on the other side of the law. Raymond Chow, nicknamed Shrimp Boy, was born in Hong Kong in 1959. He received the nickname Shrimp Boy from his grandmother because of his small stature and body composition. The once funny nickname became his calling card and caused some smiles, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. From childhood, Chow faced hardships. His father owned a barbershop but lost it to gambling, essentially condemning the family to a miserable existence. A large family with 4 children had to live in a one-room shack. Money was always in short supply. Hunger, poverty, and ridicule was the impetus for Raymond's fall into the abyss of criminal Asia. From an early age, Chow was involved in petty crime and street fights, which was his first step towards a criminal career. Already at a young age, he was characterized by his fearlessness and resourcefulness, which quickly caught the attention of local gangsters. At the age of 9, Chow joined one of the triads, powerful organized crime groups that controlled much of the criminal activity in Hong Kong. We have a separate video about them on our channel in which we told the full story of the triads from antiquity to the present day. At the same age, Chow first killed on the orders of the triads. From that point on, his fast-paced criminal career in Hong Kong began. He worked for the triad for almost 9 years, and during this time, he managed to earn authority and recognition among the criminal world. And at the age of 17, Chow moved with his family to San Francisco in search of a better life. But in the new city, a new cruel reality awaited him. Soon after moving to the United States, Raymond began to clash with local street gangs. Triad-affiliated Chinese gangs were active in San Francisco in the 1970s. They conducted their business in Chinatown, where they engaged in smuggling, racketeering, extortion, drug dealing, and gambling. Before leaving for the US, Hong Kong Triad members gave young Chow a letter to their colleagues in San Francisco, recommending that Raymond be accepted into the gang. And so it came to pass. Raymond Chow literally put the letter in the hands of a fellow gang member, and that same day was accepted into the Hop Sing Boys Youth Group, which was a subsidiary gang of the Hop Sing Tong organization. Hop Sing Tong was one of the oldest and most influential Chinese gangs in San Francisco. The Tong was organized back in the 19th century to protect Chinese workers from discrimination. The gold rush, the railroads, squabbles over spheres of influence. Chinese immigrants endured many things, but after all the hardships, peace and order prevailed in San Francisco's Chinatown. The neighborhood was safe from the 1930s to 1965, when throngs of new immigrants poured into San Francisco from Hong Kong and Taiwan. As a result, a cultural difference emerged between the Chinese Americans and the new Chinese immigrants. The former belittled and disadvantaged the latter. Conflicts were born out of this. The migrants began to organize into gangs, and if one of them was insulted, the whole gang would go to court. The first street gang formed by newcomers was called Ching. At that time, Tong members were no longer street thugs. They realized that they could use street gangs as their enforcers and protectors if they organized illegal activities themselves. Ching became the main defenders of Hop Sing Tong's illegal gambling houses. But such an alliance soon began to bring some difficulties. Once a month, Hop Sing Tong would come to the gambling houses, stores, and restaurants under their control to pick up an envelope with their share. And then the Tong would find out that the monthly fee had already been collected. As it turned out, Ching decided to lift the burdens of receiving levies from merchants and owners of other businesses in Chinatown off Hop Sing's shoulders. Tong realized that they were being forced out of their territory, but they could not openly confront the young gang, as they did not want to tarnish their ghostly legitimacy and get caught by the authorities. Based on the existing realities, there was an acute question of how to subdue the brazen Ching members. The answer was obvious. They needed their own gang, working for Tong and fully subordinate to it. In the late 60s, they created their own youth gang to protect their gambling establishments. Ching did not dare to engage in open confrontation with the new Tong forces and retreated. The gang members had different names for their group, but to the public, they were known as the Hop Sing Boys, which is where Raymond Chow fell in. If a teenager by the time he reached adulthood had good authority among the young members of the gang, distinguished himself in the performance of extremely difficult tasks, or simply obeyed all the orders of the elders, he had a chance to rise to a new level and become a full member of Hop Sing Tong. For the leaders of the gang, this structure had very positive aspects. If one of the boys was caught by the police, it was always possible to deny the young criminal's involvement in the gang. It was as if he wanted to serve himself and decided to prove himself. They had nothing to do with it, and they didn't order him to do anything. Besides, while the boys were known as a street gang, the Tong had a more legitimate position and even had legal registration. Of course, they were also doing illegal business, but they tried their best to avert suspicion by hiding behind their legitimate businesses. After joining the gang, Shrimp Boy Chow began to make a name for himself on the streets. At the orders of senior gang members, he beat, shot, and robbed. Soon, Chow began running his own small crew that dealt in extortion, gambling, prostitution, and petty fraud. Due to his wit, performance, and particular ruthlessness, Raymond enjoyed a good reputation in the criminal world and soon became one of the leaders of the gang. In 1977, he, along with several members of the group, got into a shootout at the Golden Dragon restaurant located in San Francisco's Chinatown. A group of Tong's rival gang called the Joe Boys broke into the restaurant and began shooting randomly. The Joe Boys emerged in the late 60s by separating several Ching leaders from the main gang. The Joe Boys did not share Ching's views on confronting Chinese Americans. The boys wanted to unite both the new immigrants from China and the Chinese Americans. Playing on two fronts, they were able to recruit many Asians from both sides and create their own small army. And to make the new force a force to be reckoned with, the boys decided to show up bold, loud, and bloody. By attacking the Golden Dragon restaurant, they hoped to deprive Tong of a few people and show their influence. 5 people were killed and 11 were injured in the shootout. All of them were ordinary residents of Chinatown and had no gang affiliation. Surprisingly, none of the members of the two gangs were killed that night. Raymond Chow was also able to survive the infamous Golden Dragon massacre. The massacre marked the beginning of change. The event drew national attention and forced law enforcement to take a deeper look into San Francisco's Chinese underworld. Much of the interest from the authorities came solely because the victims were ordinary citizens and tourists vacationing at the restaurant that fateful night. Gang shootings and murders of gang members were not uncommon, and the police tried to stay out of their squabbles. But after the killing of civilians, Chinatown came to a standstill. Tourists and residents simply stopped visiting the neighborhood altogether. No one went into the stores and restaurants of Chinatown. The economy of a part of the city simply came to a halt. Naturally, taxes from this part of the city stopped coming into the city budget. The mayor of the city, George Moscone, came to Chinatown and offered a reward of $100,000 to the one who would name and point out the persons involved in the events in the restaurant. That was a lot of money, especially by the standards of the time. So, there were plenty of people willing to turn the criminals in. As a result, the Joe Boys gang was eliminated through a series of arrests, which left Ching and the Hop Sing Boys as the main gangs in Chinatown. Meanwhile, Raymond Chow continued to consolidate his position in the San Francisco gangster world until he made one mistake. Along with several gang members, he attacked an underground gambling house. As it later turned out, there was no underground casino there. It was a party where the guests were gambling among themselves. Realizing his mistake, Raymond still decided not to turn back and still rob these people. Naturally, the victims of the robbery reported to the police, and soon Shrimp Boy was arrested. In 1978, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In prison, Chow began to delve deeper into aspects of his dangerous profession. By making inquiries and meeting new people behind bars, he gained many more connections on the city streets than when he was free. At the same time, the Hop Sing boys in San Francisco were all but wiped out by Ching and law enforcement, so the gang had to move to Oakland. Ching and their leader, Danny Wong, were now a major force in Chinatown. Raymond Chow was determined to change that. When Chow got out of prison in 1985, he began rounding up former associates and reclaiming the streets of Chinatown in every way he could, mostly by massacring or killing single Ching members. The Ching gang's dwindling numbers made its leader Danny Wong think about negotiating. He contacted Raymond and offered to team up with him, but Chow wasn't about to share the city with anyone else and refused. Thanks to his prison connections and his confrontation with Ching, he rose through the ranks of Hop Sing and eventually became the leader of the gang. But not everyone in Tong agreed with Shrimp Boy's candidacy for the leadership position. Infighting began, and to make sure that no one had any doubts about his candidacy, Raymond began to eliminate competitors. When several high-ranking members of the gang disappeared, others supported Chow, and soon he took control of the whole Tong. Chow now managed both the legal and illegal activities of the gang. Raymond tried to pay more attention to the first component. He wanted to legitimize himself and pretend to be a model citizen to remove from his person the harsh gaze of the guardians of the law, but it didn't work. Just a year later, Chow went back to prison. They caught Raymond when he was involved in a clash with members of the Ching gang in a nightclub. He served 3 years and was released from prison in 1989. During those 3 years, Shrimp Boy's criminal career was all but destroyed. All power over the Asian underworld was in the hands of Ching. Chow was already getting word in prison that they would try to eliminate him as soon as he was released. But he couldn't stay in prison all his life hiding from his enemies either. The resulting dilemma was resolved when Raymond met a newly arrived gangster from Hong Kong named Peter Chong. Peter Chong was a reputable member of the Wo Hop To triad in Hong Kong. He was sent to California to establish Wo Hop To's activities in the United States. Peter Chong was looking for someone who knew the streets of San Francisco, understood the underworld of the city, and had a good knowledge of how the Chinatown gangs were organized. Peter Chong's plans were quite ambitious. He wanted to create a favorable environment in San Francisco so that the Wo Hop To triad could take control of all Chinese organized crime in the state. And Chong met the perfect man in the person of Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow. Chow briefed his Hong Kong counterpart on the situation in the city, about the number and influence of individual gangs, which are not much left, as almost the entire city was controlled by Danny Wong and his gang Ching. By favoring Peter Chong, Raymond became the second after him in the American branch of Wo Hop To. Hop Sing Tong became a branch under the control of Wo Hop To. Chow now reported to Peter, and Peter reported to a Hong Kong-based triad leader named Cheng Chi Tai, also known as Mad Tai. After gaining power, people, and support from Asia, Shrimp Boy intended to establish Hop Sing Tong control on the streets of San Francisco. Chow established several Hop Sing centers in San Francisco with the goal of recruiting young and hungry Asians into his gang. With the addition of many new recruits from Chinatown, the old Hop Sing loyalists from Oakland, Chow set out to destroy Ching to reclaim the streets of San Francisco. Chong and Chow established a join-or-die policy. Chow and members of Hop Sing began terrorizing smaller gangs in the city, such as Jackson Street Boys, to integrate them into the Wo Hop To. Many joined without any resistance, as Shrimp Boy's authority no longer allowed anyone to go against him. Wo Hop To now had all the gangs of San Francisco's Chinatown under his control except Ching's Danny Wong. Now the roles had reversed. Chow offered Wong to join them, just as Wong himself had once offered the same to Raymond, but like Chow then, Wong also refused. This led to Danny Wong being murdered in April 1990. Shrimp Boy did not tolerate rejection and was not going to spare anyone. Without their leader, the members of the Ching gang decided to join Hop Sing. The others who remained loyal to the gang fled to Los Angeles. Raymond Chow and Peter Chong now completely dominated San Francisco's Chinese world and had an army of loyal gangs all along the West Coast. Money flowed into Chow and Chong's pockets like rivers. In proportion to the increase in money, rivers of blood flowed in the streets and mountains of corpses piled up. But Peter Chong was still not satisfied with the situation. Now he wanted to subjugate the entire Asian attack world of the East Coast. Hop Sing went to a colleague, the Tong, better known to the public as the Chinese Merchants Association. This organization controlled the East Coast and had several subgroups in New York, Boston, and Florida. By making contact and holding a meeting, the triad was able to bring the Boston Onleong and their leader, Wing Yang Chan, under the Hop Sing without any resistance. The scale of the business was growing, and so were the triad's appetites. Raymond and Chan were appointed to new positions. They took over the triad's heroin distribution network. The triad's next target was Boston's largest Chinese street gang, Ping On. It was run by legendary gangster Stephen C. The gang had close ties to On Lane. Even so, Stephen C. refused to join Hop Sing, so Wing Chan and the triad decided to kill him. Chan asked Hop Sing to send some guys to kill Stephen C. Shrimp Boy also sent some men to Boston, but the assassination attempt failed because the police showed up nearby. And it wasn't long before luck completely turned against the triad. Peter Chong was arrested on illegal gambling charges and summoned to a hearing on Chinese organized crime. But the court never heard his testimony. The gangster took advantage of the Fifth Amendment. After the failed assassination attempt and Chong's arrest, Raymond began to suspect that they had an informant in their ranks. He began to show signs of paranoia. Everyone around him seemed to be a traitor. It got to the point where Shrimp Boy blamed all their failures on a female gangmate and ordered her to be beaten twice. The unfortunate girl wasn't originally an informant, but ironic as it may be, a woman loyal and devoted to her gang after being slandered and beaten decided to become a law enforcement informant in retaliation. This long series of mishaps, largely instigated by Chow himself, led to mass arrests and charges. Raymond Chow and his colleague from Hop Sing and Hop Sing went to trial in October 1993. Authorities swooped down on virtually the entire triad network and caught 19 leaders whose spheres of influence stretched from Hong Kong to San Francisco to Boston. Raymond Chow and Wing Chan were charged with forming what the government characterized as a criminal alliance. This was the first time the government used the Organized Crime Act to target Chinese gangs on the West Coast. Peter Chong's influence and connections helped him escape from the United States. Raymond Chow, on the other hand, had to stand trial. Chow was tried in two separate trials. The first trial was for illegal gun sales, and the second was for racketeering. Chow's former associate, Wing Chan, already known to us, became a key witness against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial was long and arduous. Authorities presented numerous pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and material gathered from years of investigation. Despite the best efforts of his lawyers, Chow was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in prison in 1996. While Shrimp Boy was in prison, Hop Sing lost a lot of street credibility, and Hop Sing generally withdrew from the United States. Peter Chong, who initially fled the country, was arrested and extradited to the United States in 2000. State authorities initially offered Chow to testify against Chong, but he refused because he considered such an act a betrayal. But after Raymond learned that Chong had escaped and left him to answer for all the sins of their criminal organization, he felt betrayed and decided to cooperate. Other members of the gang also became key witnesses against Peter Chong. He was found guilty of racketeering, murder for hire, extortion, and arson. Chong was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Part of Raymond Chow's deal to cooperate was that he would be released from prison earlier than his court-ordered sentence in 2003. Upon his release, Raymond told the public that he had changed a lot. He began doing volunteer work and often gave speeches at seminars to keep children from entering the underworld. I was the leader of the Chinese triad. Yes, that's my background, but I'm done with it. I did a lot of bad things, pimping, selling contraband, extortion, and drug dealing. All of that really touched me, and I'm ready to be done with it. Just hear me out. I'm going to get on the straight and narrow, to be an example to the young guys and show them not to get involved with the underworld. Believe in me, Chow said. Unfortunately for everyone who believed in Raymond's sincere intentions to change, he didn't. Chow portrayed himself as a saint and a complete renunciate of crime, while secretly continuing his underworld endeavors. Despite his reputation as a whistleblower, Chow took to the streets as the leader of his old gang. But a lot has changed in the years he spent in prison. The men who once respected him, willing to do his boss's bidding, were either behind bars themselves or retired. The decades spent in confinement had stripped Raymond of many of the privileges he had enjoyed before. Spheres of influence shrank, controlled territories became independent, Tong control centers in the many cities had all but disappeared. Chow no longer had the connections, influence, authority, and opportunities he had in the early 90s. Yes, when he came out of Tong incarceration, the Tong did not turn its back on him. Raymond Shrimp Boy was remembered and waited for, but not by everyone anymore. There were many new faces that did not share the old orders and authority of the old leaders, and business in general had changed. Police and federal services stopped turning a blind eye to the Asian underworld as it was in the 70s. Now the police controlled and monitored almost every move of both Raymond Chow and Hop Sing Tong as a whole. Raymond was determined to regain control of Hop Sing Tong, which at the time was headed by a man named Alan Leong. Much had changed since Shrimp Boy's arrest. Many of Hop Sing Tong's businesses had completely abandoned criminality. It was no longer a criminal organization, but an ordinary American company established by a reputable businessman with Chinese roots. Shrimp Boy Chow began negotiations to bring the organization back under his wing with his usual approach, threats and blackmail. He didn't even try to negotiate with the new Tong leader or make a deal. No negotiation or compromise. Raymond was determined to take back what he thought was rightfully his. That's why he immediately told Alan his vision for the future. Either Leong goes quietly into the sunset or loudly and painfully into the next world. Naturally, the prospect of a return to the old ways under the leadership of a former leader with blood on his hands did not please Alan at all. He had heard about Raymond's character and manners, so he didn't want to let direct threats and blackmail get in the way. After meeting with Chow and receiving a direct ultimatum, Leong turned to the FBI, stating that Raymond Chow is trying to blackmail him and wants to regain his business, again turning it into a criminal group. But for reasons unknown, the authorities decided not to get involved in the Asian squabble and ignored Alan Leong. After that, Leong began to fear for his life, and he developed paranoia, which turned out to be not groundless. Leong was shot and killed in front of his wife in 2006. Chow attended the funeral, but everyone suspected him of murder. He was arrested and spent 10 months in jail before being released due to lack of evidence of involvement in the murder. After his release, Chow took over the management of Hop Sing Tong and continued his criminal activities. It was also during this time that Chow wanted to become a celebrity. To whitewash his image, he began appearing on various TV shows. Raymond also used his status as a Tong leader to hook up with several celebrities and important figures in American society. Around 2010, Chow met an undercover agent posing as an Italian mafia member from New Jersey. The agent introduced Chow to Senator Leland Yee, and the two began working on an arms smuggling operation and money laundering scheme. Chow introduced the agent to members of the Hop Sing Tong and encouraged them to commit crimes together. In 2011, Raymond ran for Hop Sing Tong leader, and his opponent was a man named Jim Tat Kong. There was talk among the gang that Kong was poaching people to vote for him instead of Chow. But as you may recall, Raymond didn't tolerate that kind of thing. Most of the people who went against Chow died for some reason. A sad fate befell Kong and his wife as well. They were killed on October 17, 2013. All these deaths made the authorities suspect that Chow had a hand in it all. At the same time, Shrimp Boy had a conflict with Hop Sing member Andy Lee. Lee and Chow were at least good acquaintances, if not friends, until Lee refused to assassinate another Hop Sing member on Raymond's orders. At one nightclub party, Lee told Chow that he was getting tired of his cocaine addiction and his desire to be a celebrity. This led to a fight between the two, which resulted in Shrimp Boy being beaten and left lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Raymond's credibility began to fray. People began to turn away from him. To make matters worse, the authorities were also breathing down his back. On March 26, 2014, Raymond Chow and Senator Lee Lan-yi were arrested. Yi became the target of a massive federal investigation. Law enforcement obtained search and arrest warrants throughout the Chinatown neighborhood and dozens of other sites in any way connected to Yi and Raymond Chow. Federal agencies seized computers and all documents supporting the organization of fraud, weapons smuggling, and other crimes. There was a wave of arrests and many gang members were apprehended. On July 1, 2015, Senator Yi pleaded guilty to a federal racketeering crime and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Chow's trial for murder and racketeering charges began in November 2015. He was charged with the murders of Alan Leong and Jim Tat Kong. Also, in the charge were counts of money laundering, conspiracy to transport stolen property, smuggling, and racketeering. Chow's former friend Andy Lee was brought in as a key witness against his former boss. Lee was initially reluctant to cooperate but changed his mind after reading a transcript that showed Chow had instructed him to kill him. The testimony of Lee and other gang members led to Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow being found guilty. Raymond's criminal career officially ended on August 4, 2016, when he was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life sentences for his crimes. Chow is still alive and is still in prison to this day. After Raymond Chow and many high-ranking members of the Hop Sing gang were taken off the streets, San Francisco's Chinatown became a fairly peaceful and safe place.